When the sun disappeared behind Bahrugged rooftadi, a little quiet began to awaken. A narrow skinned awaken. The narrow streets, lit only by torches and flickering lanterns, filled with the murmurs of travelers, merchants, sailors, soldiers, and soldiers, behind heavy wooden doors and dimly lit windows. A business it existed in nearly every medieval town, carried on its nightly rhythm. Brothels of the Middle Ages. Places that were both condemned and tolerated, hidden in plain sight within the fabric of everyday life. Medieval society and at the same time, many city authorities believed that completely banning it to crucial problems. As a result, prostitution, spirit historians sometimes describe as a necessary evil. Instead of eliminating it, many cities chose to regulate it. In towns of Europe, from London and Paris to Florence and Cologne, local governments quietly allowed brothels to operate under specific rules. In medieval London, for example, brothels were concentrated in the district of Southwark. Of the River Thames from the main city. This area fell under the authority of the Bishop of Winchester, and the became known as Steelers. The women who worked in them were sometimes referred to as Winchester. Though their lives were difficult and often precarious, their work was openly acknowledged by authorities who believed that regulating within the city. These establishments were not always hidden in dark alleys. In many cases, both operated in recognizable buildings, sometimes even into the city. Municipal records from the late Middle Ages that certain brothel owners requires work regulations. To follow strict regulations. They were forbidden from Britain on weekends, on religious holidays, and sometimes Sundays, even on Sundays. The women inside were somewhat them kings, from schools and heavier and curfews. Despite these regulations, the lives of women themselves were often harsh, Many came cans, Akanans, orphan souls. Few other options. Some arrived in the city as servants or migrants, find themselves drawn into sex trade by economic necessity. Is not yet visible. That's didn't yet morally condemned. Inside the brothels, atmosphere could vary widely. Establishments were little more than rent, when framed wooden houses where several women shared small rooms. Others were a surprisingly organized business. These run by experienced madams who managed the house. Collected payments, and customers ranged from laborers, apprentices to merchants and traveling soldiers passing through town. Yet medieval brothels were not only places of pomos. They were also windows into the social tensions of time. They reflected the contradictions of a society that publicly moral purity while allowing human desires. For city governments, brothels were often seen as a way to prevent disorder. In their view, helped protect respectable women from harassment. As night deepened in the medieval streets, sounds of laughter, the sounds of music, and quiet conversations behind it themselves, sometimes reaching some behind things in the list windows. Within these walls old stories of a companionship and fleeting moments of human connection. The brothels of the Middle Ages were more than just of scandal. They were part that were about the realities of life in medieval Europe. And as historians continue to uncover records, archives, the arguments, attendance, and church writings, clearer picture slowly emerges that existed in the shadows of cathedrals, of castles, where the strict ideals of medieval morality met the complicated realities of everyday life behind. The life behind the wooden doors of a medieval brothel. Life followed a rhythm that was both structured and uncertain. These buildings were often ordinary houses adapted of her business. The lower floor, a small hall where visitors were received, sometimes with simple benches, candles, tables, table where payments were arranged. Upstairs, with wooden beds, mattresses, as private space for customers and persons alike. Many brothels were managed by a woman known as a madam. Occasionally by a strawberries. Was practical and demanding. She collected payments, enforced the house rules. And in regulated brothels, prices were sometimes fixed by local custom or municipal law. The daily routine of the women who worked in works began long before the evening crowd arrived. They cleaned the rooms and, when possible, prepared candles or lamps and helped arrange the common spaces. Personal possessions were usually few. Many women owned things containing clothing, perhaps a comb, and few coins carefully saved over time. Customers arrived from minnox of light. Doctors, sailors returning from long voyages, and soldiers stationed nearby could live among the visitors, while wealthier clients sometimes balls quite boiling but served with population. Medieval towns, despite the constant activity, places of strict control. Curfews were often enforced, and where women could be fined if they broke cities. In some towns, they were required to wear the words in big things, so they could be big in public. These rules, the balance authorities tried to maintain balance between tolerance and separation. Within these walls, friendships formed among the women. And hardship were never far away. Their lives were shaped by economic survival. And the bills offered by them contrary the many danger to what many imagine. Medieval prostitution, one always hidden or entirely illegal. In fact, several Europeans detailed regulations governing brothels who worked within them. Municipal authorities believed with the leaves was likely by control disorder. Balancing brothels in specific districts. Cities could monitor activity and rather than conflict within other neighborhoods. These desert areas became well known among residents and travelers alike. In Paris during the 13th century, royal ordinances attempted to restrict where brothels could operate. Similar laws appeared in cities such as Florence, Venice, and Cologne. Some cities required brothel owners to pay taxes or licensing fees. Turning the trade into a small but recognized part of the urban economy. At the same time, strict moral rules forced. Brawls were usually for benefits. Women couldn't attend them to certain public spaces. Public spaces, oases, or ways more dress that wear them as respectable citizens. Punishments breaking these regulations could include fines, infringements, Yet, despite these laws, enforcement was often inconsistent. Local officials sometimes tolerated violations, especially when brothels in crowded urban communities had areas that came alive after sunset. These districts were rarely hidden secrets. Travelers arriving in town often learned quickly such places could be found. In London, the districts all being one of the most series of regulated brothels in medieval England. Located just outside the strict jurisdiction of the city, London, Southwark offered a space where authorities, a word has to be, allowed certain illnesses. Elsewhere, across Europe, similar neighborhoods appeared in the walls, walls, rivers, or busy mart roads. Sense. Travelers and merchants frequently pass through them. Any of these preferred keep the trade concentrated in areas that could be monitored. The streets themselves were uncrowded and noisy at night. Taverns, inns, muezzins, gamblers, game vendors, and stranders guided it and judged fear that blurred the line between entertainment and survival. Brothels were only one part of a larger nighttime economy that flourished in medieval towns. Despite their reputation, these districts were always lawless. Always lawless. Guards or city watchmen sometimes patrolled the streets, and brothel owners had strong incentives to prevent violence or theft that might attract unwanted attention from officials. Women who worked in medieval brothels came many different backgrounds. Most shared one common reality: limited economic. Many were migrants who had come to the city searching for work. Others had been widowed, abandoned, or left without family support. Domestic service, textile labor, street vending offered some alternatives, but these jobs were poorly paid, unstable. For some women, historical periods. The left tried sometimes marrying or finding work in other versions. Others remained trapped in a cycle of poverty that inflames. It was near impossible. Medieval documents occasionally record the names. Preservable records or city accounts. Though the details of their lives are often brief, they remind us that behind the regulations and statistics were individuals navigating the difficult realities of medieval urban life. Their stories rarely appear in chronicles and form themed at the militaries of the Middle Ages, revealing that shishim ladles that shin in medieval cities, in the dimly lit streets surrounding medieval brothel districts, survived constant awareness. This area is constant bias. These areas as assets do not only customers, thieves, wandering soldiers, and travelers in connection to the local community, while brothel keepers tried to maintain order within their houses. Its beside could become unpredictable after nightfall. City authorities were well aware of these risks. Guards, towns, broads patrolled that neighborhoods. Violence could business and threaten the fragile tolerance that allowed brothels to exist in the first place. For this reason, many brothels and efficient relationships or officials inside the houses ruled. BKB thieves sometimes handed to city guards. The madams would be gone. It depended heavily on her deals to continue. For business to continue, yet crime expects still. Start keepers, more clothing for lodging and treating women in debt that kept working long than they had planned. Others acted more like managers, providing protection and food in exchange for a share of earnings. For the women themselves, survival meant navigating these complicated conditions. Every day, they learned to read the moods of customers, to recognize danger quickly, and to rely on the informal forwarks misformed envoys. Without forwarders, promotions, no potential support the lives to raise himself. As an these things. Regulations in several cities or notice Pupua Goresser. When appearing in public, these rules served a social purpose. Marking prostitutes for clothing, officials believed they could maintain a clear boundary between women, in the sex trade. The exact requirements varied widely. In some towns, women wear veils or yellow veils. In others, they were forbidden from wearing certain of the luxurious reserved for married or noble women. Such laws, the moral, the friendly. While the Brothels were tolerated regulation, the women themselves were often pushed to the margins of indulgence. Their presence was allowed but careful, controlled, yet enforcement was not always consistent. Some women ignored the rules they could, especially if they hoped to blend into the crowds of busy markets or festivals. Records occasionally mention fines given to women accused of dressing above their permitted status. These clothing laws reveal how medievals health was another boast of the and brothel owners. Medieval medicine had only limited understanding of disease. Were aware that certain illnesses spreads contact. Some cities require inspecting as brothels. That's based in consent. Women and illness could be removed from work temporarily, both to protect customers and prevent outbreaks. Prevent drama criticism from religious leaders. Bathing houses, sometimes it's near the bottles, where possess and relax. These establishments were not always the likely investigation, but the proximity in creating them. In the public mind, treatments for illness ranged mice, herbalists who perform farmed hobbies. Time. While these treatments were limited in effectiveness, they reflect an early attempt to address health concerns within the urban environment. For many women, illness represented a serious to survival. We come to work at safeties existed for those unable to support themselves throughout the Middle Ages. The presence of brothels sparked ongoing debate among religious leaders. The church officially confessed constitution yes. Some theologians that greater soul chaos. One of the most influential voices in this discussion. This theologian's compared prostitutes to a drainage channel in a palace, suggesting, while all unpleasant, might worsen spreading through society. Such arguments did not hint that the church approved the truth. Sermons, and this once was Jones and urged about penitence in prostitution. At the same time, some eliciting some temptations thus plan to help women with the trained freed and begin new lives. These efforts reflect the broader tension between moral ideals and social reality. Myth, meal, a full society strew just related the blades. Give the late Middle Ages, late the attitudes toward prostitution began to shift. Several including Borings of moral standards. In many cities, Borthels, Brothels, odds. Authorities who had previously betrayed altogether. However, these efforts rarely removed prostitution completely. Instead, a percentage is overbeen present within urban life. The closing of regulated brothels, the urban history. For centuries, these have existed as strange palaces pervading conditions what is based medinoi. But much of what we know about medieval brothels becomes Breton scarcas in accordance the arguments, court documents, and church writings. These sources reveal a world that was rarely brought in official chronicles. The brothels of medieval Europe were sealed of scandal or rumor. They were businesses, workplaces, and social space shaped by economic realities of their time. Within their walls lived individuals whose stories were created through repeated others. Within this burgers pure tonight of everyday urban life. Their presence reminds us as history's turbulent phase, not only as much as the kings and wars, but also the story of ordinary people navigating circumstances. circumstances. When we look back at the streets, the Stevel cities, illuminated and crowded with travelers, we begin to understand these hidden worlds existed alongside the great cathedrals, markets, moldera, and defined the era. The brothels of the Middle Ages were part landscape. A reminder in a spaces as low, too hardest to control or ignore. In many medieval cities, brothels do not exist in isolation. They were part of a larger nighttime economy that included taverns, inns, bathhouses, entertainment venues where travelers and locals can gathered after dark. As the day's work ended, these plazas of social activity. Taverns were often located close to villages. Probabilities. Crown between travelers who arrived in the city after sunset would often seek food, drink, and lodging needs continuing elsewhere, but either their evening elsewhere. Music, games, toys, the rooms, and movement. For city authorities, these post represent each on one hand, they attract indigent visitors who contributed to the local economy. On the other hand, large nighttime gatherings could easily lead to disorder. Brothel owners understood this environment well. Maintained quiet alliance with near police tavern directed to potential customers toward their houses. In this way, the businesses of the medieval night supported each other, forming an informal network within the lands. At the center of many brothels stood the madam, a figure whose responsibilities went far beyond managing a household. She was negotiator, protector of the women working under her roof. A successful madam and workers. She handled payments in house rules and ensured disputes that escalated in business to disturbances. Her reputation determined whether customers had investment policies. presence, some madams said previously in the trade themselves. And the sparse and Brothels. Others were widows or business-minded women who saw an opportunity to manage a profitable house. Historical records occasionally reveal their names, appearing in simple accounts, or notes, or court documents. These glimpses show that the madam was often within the key figure who kept the entire operation even then running. Political befunctions of parliamentary common assumptions, decisions were not limited to one particular group. Medieval records suggest customers came of backgrounds, young apprentices who left from their families while learning a trade, were frequent visitors some cities and some stationed near city walls also formed a significant portion playing along periods of military activity. Traveling merchants and sailors brought another element to the mix. Journeys across regions. They often meant they have been sins, where the brothels provided not only physical services, but also temporary companionship unfamiliar places, while members of the upper classes sometimes visited brothels. Some types of districts, while ways more discreet arrangements outside the regulated houses. Nevertheless, the diversity of visitors illustrator layers medieval urban solitude in a middle brothel rarely intended as a permanent career. Yet leaving the trade was often difficult. Economic hardship, social stigma, and limited employment opportunities created barriers that many women struggled to overcome. Despite these challenges, historical sources that some women did manage to leave. A few married customers or craftsmen and attempted to build new lives within the city. Others moved to different towns where their past was less widely known. Certain women as singing consistent These places offered shelter, work, and spirit for those willing to adopt a different path. While these opportunities were limited, they reveal a medieval society did not view prostitution as an entirely versus the reverse definition. Even within a rigid social structure, small pathways toward change sometimes existed. Brothels, also subtle roles, also political in the political life of medieval cities. Their regulation involved negotiations and regulations. Clerical obedience. Interests. City leaders sometimes some religious stringency with moral laws. At the same time, the same owners often preferred maintaining weighted districts that prevented the trading fee from spreading throughout the city. These competing pressures created policies that shifted over time. Some attempted temporary bans only discover that unregulated prostitution quickly appeared elsewhere. As a result, medieval brothel regulation and the compromise, rather than a fixed system, the policies reflected ongoing debates about morality, public order, and economic reality. Historians know about medieval brothels from unexpected sources: court cases, tax records, municipal regulations that would otherwise lost. These documents rarely tell complete stories. Instead, they provide brief glimpses, a nuance in a fine ledger, imposed for breaking clothing laws, or complaint recorded after a dispute between a customer and a brothel keeper. From these scattered as far as Hıstorıy piece and das teenager. Each dogma reveals another small detail of Brothels. In official chronicles, the result is a portrait of urban life. This lacks as often in plots in history. In the 15 by the late 15th, early 16th centuries, many being city and officially tolerated brothels, changing moral attitudes, combine famed with fees of disease. Encourage stricter policies. Some brothel districts that had existed centuries disappears almost entirely from official records. Billions. Regulations were rewritten, gradually moved into less forms, yet the history these places did vanish completely. Their legacy made in street names. Aquas not printed in city halls and monasteries. Today, societies confronted the realities of human behavior, trying to maintain systems of order and morale after midnight. The atmosphere of medieval brothel districts often changed. The earlier crowds of travelers and merchants, leaving them quieter, but more at an environment. Hanging above narrow streets, flicker the night winds, upon the walls of wooden houses for the women who worked at wood. The women in the most unpredictable night. Customers arrived already tired from long journey and rest. Others came from taverns nearby, bringing with them the louder energy of drink and celebration. Brothel keepers remained alert during these hours. A peaceful night meant the house would entering without trouble. But soon that could have small attract attention from the city watch. Maintaining calm was essential. Not so. The first means to exist outside. The distant sounds of horses, footsteps echoed through the streets. Medieval cities never became compliant, but the rhythm of life slowed as the first light morning began to appear. The rooftops slowly we returned to quiet. Customers parted quietly through peering back into the daily life of the city. Inside the houses, the women through the night through the night. Candles burned low. Rooms were tidied. Sie beweglichste Zeitgeist. Voices, the voices of the night. For many of these women, daylight meant temporary. Medieval society often preferred not to acknowledge the hours of presence. Yet their work had been part of the city's hidden structure, or Jeningpur, for generations. The markets would soon open. Merchantmen or goods range their goods, and the streets would down with the noise of day trade. Everyday trade. Few of the people passing the snap modect that buildings only hours before history, the kings on boars, ings, wars, hanged ones, wars, monuments, and great monuments, but the daily life of ordinary people made level society deeply, just as deeply. The women who worked in brothels, part of that hidden history. Their stories are rarely told in detail. Berkel, most historians of the names. Yet these small fragments reveal lives lived with the difficult realities of the medieval world. Economic hardship, migration, and submitting toward choices that society quietly tolerated. Within the walls of brothels, they formed friendships and strategies for survival. Remembering their experiences helps historians understand the complexity between Meloth of the Stiletusenan, Visin Lots the Ism Amdes Ulovs institutions. The existence of medieval brothels illustrates one of the central cultural contradictions of the Middle Ages. Religious teaching. Many city authorities have social order. This uneasy balance were both tolerated and restricted. Henk is still met een list stigmatized for centuries. This arrangement, the Nitium economies, travelers did thriving invitations and local movements and locals Hell officials devalues designed to contain rather than eliminate the trade. These contradictions remind us that historicals that manage computes through compromise rather than absolute solutions. Although the brothels of the Middle Ages, their present is conspicuous in subtle ways. Old street names, some preserved city maps, sometimes reveal their locations once stood in some Europe cities. Historians have identified neighborhoods where Rakulegay Forels is Svensons themselves may have changed. Archival of evidence preserves their memory. Museums and historical research continued untold about these places functioned within medieval urban life. Each discovery of another storage of human behavior. When we imagine the Middle Ages, we often picture castles, knights, and great cathedrals, crowded streets. Yet, deep beneath these frames and examples was a falls. In official chronicles, the brothels of medieval civil cities were part of that world. They reflected and the constant effort of authorities with practicality behind the doors of these hallucined individuals, navigating difficult circumstances. Is yet Serpenta and de both did on their existence. Today, let us stare and scatter their storms immense. Doing so, they reveal a deeper understanding of medieval life. Medieval life. One that includes not only the powerful, but also those who lived in the shadows of history. And as we look back across the centuries, we look like those maze this. Love is found in the place inside as place society. Police hide hardest to hide.